My name is Hannah Bodwin, and my presentation is on magnetoreception, or magnetic sense in animals. So first of all, there is a lot of evidence that many animals do have a magnetic sense, and that evidence has been obtained through many different research methods, which are both ethical and unethical, as you can see in the diagram. So the first point of evidence that a lot of researchers have obtained is that a lot of animals will align themselves with the Earth's magnetic axis. So in the top left of the diagram, you see a termite aligning with the magnetic field. There's evidence that they do that, and there's also evidence that a lot of cows and grazing animals will align when they're grazing with the Earth's north-south axis. Secondly, there's a lot of evidence that's been found that attaching a magnet to an animal could disrupt its navigation, which you see in the bottom left of the diagram. There's also been a lot of evidence that refutes this, though, so that at least indicates that magnetoreception is not an animal's only way to navigate, but it could be part of it. Third, in a lot of less ethical studies, scientists have removed or numbed parts of the animal that they thought were magnetoreceptive. So in the top right of the diagram, you see them doing that to a pigeon's beak, and that was shown to prevent the pigeon from sensing magnetic fields, which is evidence for the ferromagnetic theory that I'm going to talk about later. And lastly, scientists have observed that when an animal is in a Helmholtz coil, which is a coil of wax that produces a magnetic field around the animal, they're going to orient with that magnetic field. So researchers think that there are three main ways that this could be happening. The first one is electromagnetic induction, the second one is ferromagnetism, and the third one is a free radical chemical reaction. So we know that ferromagnetism works in bacteria and phytoplankton. So essentially they have these tiny chains of ferromagnetic or iron-containing minerals. That's like magnetite or greigite in them, and you can see those chains in the image. And so when the magnetic field exerts a force on those chains, because they're so tiny, it creates a torque, and they rotate the bacteria and the phytoplankton into an alignment with the Earth's magnetic field. So the bacteria then use that to sense which way it's down, so that they can find less oxygenated mud deeper down in the soil. And those chains have been discovered in a lot of other animals too, like honeybees and pigeons. So that could explain how those animals are sensing the magnetic fields. And also, like I talked about earlier, researchers have found that numbing the part of a pigeon's beak that contained those chains did disrupt their navigation, which is good evidence that this theory could be correct. So I'm not going to get too in-depth on the free radical chemical reactions because that's more chemistry. But essentially, researchers are proposing that there would be an electron transfer between two molecules, which leads to two unpaired electrons, and those are the free radicals. And a free radical then either has an upspin or a downspin, and the reaction will proceed if the spins of those radicals are oppositely aligned. So if there's one radical with an upspin and one radical with a downspin. And we know that Earth's geomagnetic field can influence the alignment of those free radicals. It can influence their spin. And so if the magnetic field changes, researchers think that that will change the rate of the reaction, and animals will be able to sense that and therefore know where they are based on the magnetic field. Finally, electromagnetic induction. So an overview of how that would work is that as an animal moves through Earth's magnetic field, it generates a voltage gradient inside itself, and it senses that change in voltage in order to navigate. And so for that to make sense, an animal has to be able to sense that voltage drop, and that voltage drop is really, really small. But researchers have found that there are some animals that can do that. And those animals are sharks and stingrays, elasmobranchs. And those animals have long canals inside their body that are filled with a conductive jelly, and they essentially work like electrical cables. And at the ends of those canals, there's connections of cells called ampullae, and those are very, very sensitive to small voltage changes. So researchers estimate that they could sense about 2 microvolts per meter, and that essentially means that they could detect an electric field produced by a 1.5 volt battery with one electrode 750 kilometers away from the other. Really, really sensitive. And that's where the voltage drop occurs, and so researchers think those animals could totally be sensing a voltage change from a magnetic field. So this is showing a diagram of how this would work. The shark is swimming into the page, and the red tubes, those are the canals with the ampullae at the ends communicating. And the magnetic field is horizontal. And so by the Lorentz force law, if the shark is swimming into the page and the magnetic force is horizontal, there is a vertical magnetic force on the shark, and therefore a vertical voltage drop across the ampullae that the shark is able to detect. And we know they can detect it because researchers have found that it is 25 microvolts per meter, and ampullae can detect 2 microvolts per meter. So therefore, if the shark can detect the voltage drop, it can sense the magnetic field changing, and it can know how to navigate. So there's a couple limitations to this theory. There's really limitations to all of them, but specifically for electromagnetic induction, we know that only elasmobranches are really known to have enough electrical sensitivity for this to work. So it wouldn't work for a pigeon, for example. Also, elasmobranches can't detect DC voltage, which is kind of strange, and ocean currents are generating electrical fields inside the water. It's not just an elasmobranch moving through the water, which could kind of cause a wrinkle in their ability to navigate. And finally, it's kind of hard to test the theory because sharks and stingrays are not great experimental animals, so we're not totally sure that this is how they do it, but it's totally a possibility. Overall, there's a lot of different ways that animals could be doing this, and they might even be doing it in different ways from each other, but in general, the question is not yet answered. Thank you for listening, and here are my sources.